Hi everyone, it's me again, and today we're doing an unscripted rant about unschooling, okay? Because I'm so done, it's a little bit ridiculous. Alright, now this is fully unscripted. I have a flow in my mind of like what I want to talk about still though. Also, links, source, ways to support the channel all down below, including Patreon, YouTube, members, that whole nine. Thank you to my current members and patrons, names on the screen. And what I'll do, as you can see as I'm talking, for your fan service, for those of you who have supported me so dearly, you have currently some fan service of Gus sleeping behind me because you can't see him when I'm filming, but he's over there. The sort of structure of this video is I'm going to talk about what unschooling is and my general problems with it. Then we're going to go into, I have 5 TikToks that are from unschooling parents for unschooling, and I'm going to react to those. Then I've got 5 TikToks that are from people who do not like unschooling. And then I'm actually going to show you what a lesson plan looks like, and I'm going to show you what the curriculum looks like, and I'm going to show all publicly available information because I'm so tired of people just guessing what a teacher does and then being like, and that's what they all do, and they're conning our children into thinking XYZ. Stop it. Like, just stop. I don't know. Anyway, let's get into, I guess, the sort of part 1, which is just what is unschooling. So, obviously, there's different education systems that exist. For context as to why, too, I wanted to talk about this and why people kind of asked me to talk about this is because I have a master's of education, specifically in teaching in secondary, specifically English language arts. Now, I also taught ERC and drama. ERC is a course in Quebec called Ethics of Religious Culture. It's been replaced by something called Quebec Society or something along that line. The reason why I'm not sure is because when I was working, it was not finished yet, and it's like was unclear like what direction it was going to be because they started it. What month is it? October, so a month ago. And so those are the courses I taught. I also private taught for 3 years online, which I did tutoring, but I also did like teaching where I would like make curriculums for kids over the summer to kind of keep their skills up. I would have them write papers with me and things. I taught from ages, I did teach a couple of elementary schoolers, but I typically taught, I usually wouldn't take anything below like the 8th grade if I had a choice. So 12, 13 to, I taught people up into graduate school and university in the United States, specifically for some reason the most. So that was, the oldest student I had, I believe, was 65. And then the average was like in their mid-20s. So that's what we're working with, okay? Honestly, I would say half of the students I taught were actually older than me. So I'm currently 24. I graduated in December at 23. And my graduation in May because of the way that the semesters are late. So that's just the context as to like what brings us here. Now, when we get into the concept of like what unschooling is specifically, so there's obviously your different types of education systems. There's public, private, homeschooling, and within homeschooling you get a bit of a tree that comes out because you've got kind of small group meeting via co-op style, then you've got your private tutor thing where it's like the parents not teaching them, it's just they have like a set of tutors. And then also then there's like your sort of mommy and daddy, or usually it's just mommy for whatever reason, society, patriarchy, I guess, whatever, is teaching you everything. Okay, so and the unschooling is typically the third one of that sort of ladder within homeschooling. Now, also when we're talking about the education system and its sort of complexities, I want to also have some sort of disclaimers here. Okay, for one, I'm having this conversation pretty negatively about homeschooling because there are a lot of issues with it, I think, that surpass the issues that present themselves in the public system and even the private system. I'm not even crazy about the private system for its own reasons. My genuine foundational belief that just because a kid comes from money means that they deserve to have a more well-rounded, funded, stable education than a kid who doesn't, and expect the kid that doesn't to overcome to the same standards as these other kids, I think is a bit broken, but we know that. So when I'm saying this, I'm acknowledging that specifically, like in the United States, that a huge fear that comes to parents is gun violence in the schools. And that is a substantial threat to them. I remember one of the students I was teaching, and this actually gets into my own issues with the public system too, especially in the United States. The United States school system, it's hard because I haven't worked in it firsthand, if that makes sense. Like I haven't done lesson plans and curriculum design and studied the curriculum of like a particular state and worked as a teacher. I just did private teaching, right? So I had to go off of materials provided by the students, stuff I could find in the schools that were publicly available, and work backwards from there. But I was teaching a student from Miami who was doing the reading test, and like the Florida State reading test, and the family was not from the United States. They were from Europe, so they weren't, like the language barrier was not an issue for him. Like he spoke English, no issue and everything like that. That's not me saying either if you come from any other continent that is the case, but what I'm saying is he comes from an area predominant. I don't want to dox him is why I'm being so vague. And he spoke English, okay, is what I'm saying. Anyway, so, but he was having trouble with these reading tests. And what I was doing was I was assessing him on reading based on kind of like neutral materials that I just had on hand, right? And I was reading with him and I was like, what's your problem? Like, why isn't this going well for you? And then I read the test, like his mom, because the problem is like with a Florida State reading test, at least for the most part, you cannot get practice exams publicly. Like you have to buy them through this like school thing or its portal or this thing that she had access to that I could not get. Like every time I tried to, it would just like lock me. They're like, you're from Canada. And they would just like lock it. But a lot of the questions relied on a robust knowledge of U.S. history and of U.S. political ideology. And I know you're going to be like, oh, Mika's just being a commie or something. Or like, because there was a question I will never forget that was talking about Ronald Reagan's speech on Roosevelt's speech on the need to have substantial resources for older people to have like a healthy nation and sharing the resources, and essentially this sort of concept that we're going to, the higher taxation for a higher income class. And one of the questions was like, why wouldn't you want to pay taxes? Which I thought was so strange because, and it was like, what's the perception? And it was essentially like, people are so strained already that they don't want to dish out for extra taxes. And sure, like I understand ideologically and just on a basic sense that like that's the answer, because if you're thinking in the current state of affairs. But then by nature, that required ignoring the context of the piece that stated that in these higher taxations that were going to not affect any of the people that would struggle to pay these taxes in the first place, as in your lower, let's say your lower 80%, genuinely, I think that like proportionally that would be it. So then it's relying on pushing the ideology of like an ignorance around the income disparities and like class consciousness, essentially, which, so I also want to bridge into another sort of thing where I'm talking about this, where if you disagree with me ideologically and politically, that's fine. This is also just like a YouTube video and a space for me, right? I was not telling the kid, hey, this makes you think in a way that I don't agree with. But I did say this is based off a pretty common platform politically in the United States, and then provided examples historically where I went from even as early as like Ronald Reagan's platforms, and I just showed him kind of like the different patterns, because politics in Europe don't run the same way as the United States. So when he was trying to read these context cues and he was trying to understand like what the answers were sort of guiding you to, it was like this block. So I stopped teaching him reading comprehension strategies and started just yapping about the political and social climate of the United States. And then he like doubled his score on the next test miraculously. And I promise you, in the amount of time that I worked with him, it was like 2 months, I could not have taught him to read twice as well as it. Like literacy, and that takes so much more time, and that we were not meeting often enough for that standard either. How do I know this? I went to school for this. I never know the direction I'm pointing in. If you are behind a grade in reading, it compounds to way longer than that. Typically, if you're a year or two behind in high school, and I'm obviously saying this very generally, in my video on talking about Gen Alpha in education, and I think maybe also my Robbie DeChristie video, if not, definitely the first one I mentioned, I link the like 150 page literacy document that I reference but I reference it in more vague and more simply because there's no reason to bog the waters with a bunch of jargon when we're just having a conversation. Essentially, to shorten, if you're behind a grade level and you're in the 10th grade, you will need to do at least about an hour and a half, typically for the curve to be actually met properly, of extra reading intervention per day in school. Anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. That would be your third level of intervention, I think, before you're fully in a separate class. Okay? So, which the reading test indicated that he was not of reading level at the first. I'm saying that I'm coming into this understanding that in the United States, the desire to homeschool might be a little bit stronger than when I'm coming from Quebec. Specifically Quebec. Because in Quebec, also, I'm going to the gym after this, okay, so let me live. Specifically in Quebec, which we'll get into this, I have the document open for later. Homeschooling is step-by-step mandated, and you have to prove top to bottom that they're learning enough that they will consistently be at level of their peers all of the time, and it's monitored. And when I say I think, it's because it changed very recently, like 3 years ago or something like that, maybe even 2021, maybe. That is 3 years, goofy. The document that I have was actually updated 3 months ago. 10 minus 4 months ago. So, and then the base version was 2023. So that's the last time it was updated. So that's why I'm saying I think, because I haven't gone into it. When my friend was in a homeschool co-op when we were in high school together, she was the year before she went to high school with me publicly. It was around monthly there had to be updates. And then there has to be reports every quarter. And then they have very, very, very specific time frames in which the kids have to meet the assessment guidelines. It says no later than July 1st they have to have indicated they are fully at level or that they are intended to repeat the year. So in Quebec, the urge to homeschool is definitely lower because they still have to follow the curriculum, or it's just considered that they're not in school, which is like not allowed, right? And then I watched a really good video on this. I'll tag it in the description because I'm so goofy and I literally forgot to do it. And I'll have to go back in my search history because I can't even come up with it. This is Unscripted. I said so. This girl talks about different states, and I think it was like Idaho or something. There was no guidance. Like, it was just like, yeah, you can just homeschool them, do whatever you want. Which unschooling is essentially homeschooling and doing whatever you want. So I never defined unschooling yet because I just did a bunch of runarounds instead, because like I said, I'm just ranting. Unschooling works with the philosophy that the structured curriculum and the separation of topics, science, math, English, French, whatever. Again, question for the Americans genuinely, do you have second language class? Like, I actually want to know, because I know, like, technically there's no official language, right? So, like, Spanish is not at the level that, like, let's say, like, French is in Canada. So, because in Quebec, if you're in English school, you have to have the equal amount of French instruction as far as language courses go. So, let's say English class was 5 hours a week, then French class has to be 5 hours a week also. So, there's a very even distribution. I want to know in the Americans if you have second language, because I've always kind of wondered that. But unschooling kind of doesn't like this separation of topics. And the goal of unschooling is to work within the interests of the child and expand beyond those interests. The problem is, and this is where people are going to get really, really mad at me, and and trust me, again, I talked about this in my Teaching Gen Alpha video, I understand the political, social, and economic parameters that we're in this current time, especially in the United States, Canada, a lot of these Western countries, does not allow for this to be prominent or common. These things that the unschooling parents are saying, such as working on the child's interests and expanding on that for them to learn, is what parenting is. As in, you should have been doing that and then sending them to public school as well. And again, I understand that the amount that people are working, the fact that there's no such thing really as a one-income household anymore. I understand that the fast nature of the world, the demanding nature of jobs, the like low pay for the amount of work. So a lot of people have side hustles, second, third jobs. This doesn't really allow for that to be that common anymore. I understand that. What I'm saying is the kind of thought process around because a lot of the curriculums were also developed before this was the reality. This is something that I've talked about in multiple papers when I was teaching or when I was working or when I was in my master's degree. My mom, for example, she did when we were like tiny babies. I have a brother who's 2.5 years older than me. That's it, just one brother, though, mind you. And what she did was she would put essentially just a bunch of toys out, or just a bunch of different like activities, and then just see what we gravitated towards. My brother, and you'll see how well this worked when I talk about what we do for a living. My brother gravitated towards Legos, building blocks, Lil Tykes toys. They're like those bigger ones, those Mega Blocks. Holy moly, why did that take me so long? He wasn't crazy about reading, wasn't crazy about any sort of action figures or anything like that, wasn't crazy about cars, liked video games, though. And then when my mom tried to put stuff in front of me, I wasn't receptive to anything. I was like not doing anything. I didn't want to do anything. But then I kept grabbing at her magazines, and I kept grabbing at like the books, and my parents are avid readers. And I would gravitate towards the books. So then my mom got me, which is so funny, I'll put a picture on screen, the like early 2000s like leap pad with a pen. And you would like touch on different little symbols and things like that. And it would read to you, and you would read back, vice versa. And then I remember before I even started school, I was like 5 years old, or before I would finish kindergarten, I had gotten to the max level the books went to, which was like the 4th or 5th grade or something. My mom was like, oh no, what do I do? That's just a little tangent on like what we do or what my life is like. But take in from that interest, this is also just me trying to prove that public schooling doesn't necessarily soil those desires and soil those pathways, right? My brother studied electronics information technology. Specifically, his talents lied in hardware and building things. He had a job before where he worked with aircraft and scanners, sensors, and things like that. And then now he works at IT at a pretty like high security level, and does just a lot of things like building computers for people, fixing the little phones, doing stuff like that, very tinkering with things. And then I worked last as an English teacher. I'm not telling you what my job is now because I don't want to get doxxed, but I'll be working with very soon, like with integrating, kind of teaching older, like adults, essentially, in a more corporate setting. And then I have a master's degree in English teaching, right? Books and yapping. The goal of unschooling is essentially to do that, is to foster, based on the kid's direction of interest, to move forward into their education in a more free-form manner, which is cool on its face. Problem is that, and I'm going to say this directly because I don't care about the consequences of this particular statement, the people that are teaching these kids do not know how to teach. And they do not know content beyond high school, probably at most, based on the context that I'm getting here. Now, the other thing, and this has enraged me in my life in general, is you need to be taught to teach. There's a thing called praxis and pedagogy, right? There is a method to doing so properly. Just because you can yap to your kid and they're responsive to you doesn't necessarily mean that you're teaching them, because you need to be able to understand the cycles of reestablishing habits, the pathways in which, like the neurological pathways in which knowledge is retained. You also need to know, for example, there's these graphs, and hopefully I can find one, which is like the sort of curvature of the attention span of a child and where it lies and where you want to bring information in and where you don't. So then in turn, you're getting these people that are just like, my kid plays with sticks, and then I'll tell them where sticks come from. Now they've learned ecology. It's like, no, because also you're not having them assessed on if they're retaining this knowledge and can practically apply this knowledge. Now, here's another thing. Before I get the people in my comments again, I don't like testing, and I've worked in the education system. I didn't like testing. From this school, actually, this is just a coincidence. I like crew necks and shorts when it's cold outside. This is like the fit of the season, of the fall season for me personally. I wrote my honors undergraduate essay on how the systems in first year physics education university being very test heavy and being very knowledge dump heavy is just a predatory practice of like discarding people because they feel like they don't need, versus things like more practical trades-based things like electronics, information technology, and their implication of electrical physics as being way more effective because it's practical and it cyclically applies its testing process. So it's, your paper tests to your labs, to your knowledge of the hardware and tangible learning of the hardware at a pace that actually is conducive to practical retention of knowledge. Okay? So unschooling in its terms is obviously to reverse the very linear structure of schooling, right? Where it's like, and I'm going to dumb this down, and these are not accurate numbers, these are not accurate statements, it's just to get an idea of what we mean. Because I didn't teach elementary, so I don't know what the numbers are for elementary. I'm not qualified to teach elementary. I've been offered a contract for elementary, and I even said no on this exact parameter, or this exact reason. In kindergarten, let's say the goal is kid knows the alphabet and can build a couple of one-syllable words with that alphabet. First grade, the goal is to use those simple words and build a 5-word sentence with them. Or 4 or 5-word sentence, like the bat is fat or something like that. Then the goal for the second grade is to make complete sentences and compound sentences and have like a somewhat logical flow of the lines as they go down. And then the third grade, the goal is paragraph. To understand what a paragraph is to write a paragraph. Fourth grade, you're getting into kind of what a paper is. Very loosely. A beginning, a middle, an end, an intro, a body, a conclusion. Then you get into the 5th grade where you're doing specific papers on specific things to serve a purpose, and you might even have a presentation. 6th grade is reinforcing that further. Once you're in 7th grade, you're doing papers. You learn what an essay is a lot of the time, XYZ, whatever. So unschooling's goal is to not be that linear, right? It's to be the kid learns to read when they can. Sometimes it's earlier. Sometimes it's later. And then when they learn it later, but then they have more of a passion, you can lean into the writing passion. But the problem is that they're not taking into account that there are thresholds that need to be met within certain ages, or the ability to do these things can be drastically lessened. This is, for example, if there have been these really, specific circumstances where people are not around hearing other people speak when they're babies. And then they have essentially an impaired ability to speak for the rest of their lives, right? Because it needs to meet the time frames. And these parents don't know that literacy has time frames. Obviously, you can learn to read when you're an adult. There's someone on TikTok who's doing it right now that was mentioned in the video I was watching before. But it becomes drastically more complicated. And also, people don't necessarily have the grace or sympathy to give that to you if you're 14 and you're illiterate. Because you need to, in order to navigate society, everything needs to be read. Because if I hold this up, English is your first language, obviously, or like you're proficient in English. I know some of my subscribers, because I have these crazy mics, are not necessarily super fluent in English, and they kind of just go off whatever. But if your English is your first language, if I hold this up, I know there's French on it. This is gonna ruin this sort of like thing I'm going for, but vive la Québec libre. I don't know what to tell you. You look at the words and you instantly read them. You look at the word energy and you see that that's energy. If you've seen the word energy before and you know how to read it, you look at those symbols and shapes and you've immediately registered it as the word energy, right? That's the expectation by the time you're in middle elementary age. And it's necessary by the time you're an adolescent. You should be able to hold up anything and be able to read the words. Shine right away. Right? You should also have what's called effective naming speed. So if I go like this, glasses, right? That should be quick. Naming speed in particular is an indicator of if there's low literacy levels. I know somebody who knows somebody, whatever, where there is homeschooling involved. And when I talked to them about just kind of like my thoughts on it, I said, if you're worried about it, check the naming speed first. Just point at an object and ask them what it is, and they should be able to do it quickly. Some of the naming speed tests are just genuinely like pieces of paper with pictures on them of like a fox, a wrench. There's TikTok joke videos where it's like a picture of something and they have them write it underneath, and then they make jokes about it. Like, that's an example of like sort of what the sheets kind of look like, but you're not writing in the words, you're just pointing at them and going, what is this? This is also why often teachers will read books to kids in like elementary school with pictures in them, and I don't have books with pictures in them. Oh, I sort of do. I have this book on queer poetry that has a lot of art, right? Let me see. Right? So they'll have like their picture book, and they'll be like, what is... Oh my God, I hate when everything's backwards on the camera. What is this? House. What is this? Fire. Good, my Lord. What are these? Sunglasses. Oh my God, what is this? Television, right? There's a reason why we do that. There's a reason why the teachers are doing that. That is assessing or solidifying the concept of naming speed. And the concept to have a better reading fluency as well, which is reading things out loud without errors. It just all builds upon itself. Now, I've had my fair share of brawls over Christmas dinner with the in-laws about phonetics' role in this whole thing. Phonetics is how you get people who can read books but can't understand the books. That's how you get the Facebook boomers, because they have poor media literacy. They have poor contextual or emotional literacy a lot of the time as well, because the focus was on building this, but then they spell like gods. Okay. Get a boomer to spell onomatopoeia, girl. They're not even gonna flinch. So obviously there's pros and cons to everything. That's a huge debate in the education space. And I'm not gonna disregard that. My own opinions on the structure of literacy and how to teach people how to read and what the best methods are and everything like that is way too, honestly, I'm so sorry to y'all, way too complicated for a YouTube video that's not in a hyper specialized audience, because what I would have to do is spend 3 hours doing a lecture on what the things I'm talking about are first before I have to get into everything. But now that I've ranted for already 20 minutes, 30 minutes, let's get into the TikTok. So this is the homeschooling document. We'll get into this in a little bit of time, but let's start with, so by the way, to give you my research parameters, to give you what I'm going off of here, I looked up the term unschooling. I pulled the first 5 videos that I could see in the first 10 seconds were positive towards it. And then I pulled the first 5 videos I could find in the first 10 seconds or so that indicated they were negative towards it. And that's all I've gone off of. The exact same, I didn't go bad homeschooling, unschooling, whatever. I literally looked up just the word unschooling spelt like this. Wait. Okay, so that's what we're going off of. You can see this one was 30 seconds. I went a little deep into this one. Okay, so then I'm also going to speed them up just a little bit for the sake of brevity. You can slow the video down. It's at 1.3 times speed.
Day 2 of unschooling, and we're at the park learning how to have fun. But before you get your
never mind, she talks so fast.
Yes, we're going to be doing reading and writing and math and maybe science, but it's not going to look the same as traditional public school. It's going to be different. There's so many comments in my comment section about, well, what if they want to be a doctor or a lawyer? And I think I've already mentioned this before one time already, but the likelihood of my kids wanting to do something that they don't see that I'm normalizing is very slim. On top of, I'm very proactive inside of my profession and my career of being an entrepreneur. They're likely going to follow that path because they're going to see how successful. I'm also going to teach them the right.
So already this is the biggest problem I have with homeschooling. This was the basis of my rant about Robbie D. Christie, is why is it that all these parents are always like, I'm doing this for the good of my child, and then the good of the child is having the same opinions as them, the same line of work as them, the same likes and desires as them, the same everything. It's the same, living the same life as them. Right? That's it. So why is it that it's always like this? And it's funny that she says this, because my brother and I have gone into careers that were nothing at all like what my parents did. My dad owned a bar, and my mom was she worked in a lot of offices. She did a bunch of different things, but her last job was she worked at Bell, the phone company in Canada, and was a lead on, I think it was billing or something like that. So it's that's completely different from what my parents did. And my dad was actually going to do law. So I feel like IT and an English teacher are pretty different.
Right way. How many doctors and lawyers and, other professions do you see where they're literally in debt? And most of these people are miserable. Most of them. I don't know that I've seen a doctor or a lawyer that's like so happy and, like I said, not in debt. And that's my goal.
I think I was talking about this with my brother the other day. So my brother only did college, no student loans. Okay? My student loans may or may not be allegedly in Minecraft like the price of like a brand new Lexus. Okay? The thing is, to me, I had someone in my DMs actually say they thought I was joking about the student loans this whole time. No, girl, I got a lot of student loans, like a soul-crushing amount of student loans. But here's the thing with this, right? I'm not miserable because of the debt or the deficit, and I pay it well, okay? Everything from the videos is my student loan money now because I have another job. The experiences that I gained, the knowledge that I gained, the person that I got to become in my academic pathway, which I talked about this like one time on a stream that I immediately deleted after. People were in shock on how kind of seemingly like traumatic it was and how stressful it was and how not ideal my education path was. Still, the experiences I got, the knowledge I got, like the knowledge I was able to obtain and work with and expand upon was worth that and more. And I really think the schooling should not 100% rely directly on the income that comes back from after it. And obviously I'm lucky that I'm able to pay my loans, but even if I didn't have this, I could still do my minimum payments without much of an issue. So it's just a big difference in the perception of that. I am not miserable because I have these deficits. I'm not miserable as a result of them. I'm not miserable to be working to pay them off. And I think that that's a very silly way to think. Because a lot of these people, the thing is too, I have a very strong,
Day 2 of unschooling.
I have a very strong inclination that it's giving MLM. Well, so ketones, that's already not a good sign. Because that's usually indicative of some sort of supplement. Okay. You're shopping with this lady. Alright, so we have a link here. Why is he about to shoot you back up to the... It doesn't even work. Okay, hold on. Let me do some searching. How do I spell this? Prove it? Like, oh, I hate how that's spelled. I have a soundboard. Hold on.
That's what you have to say about...
No, hold on.
Wow. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm just genuinely gagged. Anyway, so I'm not gonna, I really want to learn how to run my little pyramid scheme.
The same as most of them. I don't know that I've seen a doctor or a lawyer that's like so happy and, like I said, not in debt. And that's my goal with my kids, is I don't want them to experience being in debt. I'm going to teach them finances and money. And yeah, you do learn that shit in school, but how many of you guys actually utilized it and learned it in a real world way? And so day 2, unschooling, we are going to the library, maybe some thrift stores to find some books just to read. We're going to make it a point in our nighttime routine to read every single night. So read, writing, math.
So here's the funny thing about the nighttime routine thing. My mom read to me every night until when I went to public school as well. This is what I mean when I say often. The things they're saying is just like, I'm going to parent all day. It's like, yeah, respectfully, when you're tying into having kids, you're supposed to do that. Right? And I like this comment in particular right here. I'm scrolling up so you can hopefully see it above my head. I heard a lot of I, my, me, and that's the problem. Right? I'm putting my desire to essentially loop my children to the pyramid scheme above the education that will grant them essentially most of their rights in a capitalist society, realistically.
And just doing it in different ways than just sitting down as you normally would in public school. So follow me. Day 2.
I'm not going to follow her, my brothers in Christ. But next video.
So I was just added to a mastermind for people making like a minimum of 250K. And at the same time, one of my videos on free schooling is going viral. So I had like 1.5 million people watching this video about free schooling, and the comments are just going crazy. People are like,
Okay. I really don't want anybody to hate on me. The look in her eyes gives me anxiety. Like, for some reason, she's got that look of, like, someone who's very, like, I don't know, that she might act irrationally, maybe? I don't know. There's something that's giving me, like, I would disagree with her and she'd start yelling at me. Like, that's the vibe I'm getting, Which is funny, too, because, yeah, what 250K mastermind are you in? Let me see if this is another pyramid scheme lady. Okay, this is a book about palm reading. What? Auto wealth. Magic. Destiny. Alright. Spiritual teaching. What in the hell? Okay, this might just be like another video. You know what I mean? For another time. But let us continue.
you're like, oh my God, we're doing this thing. And I was thinking, man, like, I wonder where all my like unschooling parents are at. But in this mastermind of everybody making like a lot of money on terms they really like, all of the parents are unschooling their kids. And I was like, this is so validating for me, because I want to take like life, education, parenting advice from people that have actually succeeded, and nobody that's experiencing actual success has the time to be a comment troll. So go get them, kids. Thank you.
I despise the brain rot that it takes to deem all of success directly proportionate to an income being made. Because I think I would rather make... How much do teachers make? Like, if I was teaching right now, my friend who's like did the same degree as me and he just started, it's like 60,000, I think, Canadian, which is not a lot of money. That's like 48,000 USD, something like that. I would rather make that and not have to sell my soul online and talk and just be fighting with trolls all day, and have the success in the relationships I have, in the thankfulness for the environment that I've been able to build. I live in like a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in like a pretty cheap area of the city. We lease a car. It slays. The car slays, but it's still a Volkswagen Golf. And it's like, but when I look at her and I look at the stress and the anger that's coming, I don't deem that to be success. When someone's arguing about a concern of children and they're saying that the people that are unschooling their kids are having tutors, which is one of the options of homeschooling that I mentioned before, which is what my friend did. My friend did a combo of a co-op and private tutor, like cyclical, like a private tutor cycles of like, 1 week you have a private tutor every day that you're doing math with, you have one that you're doing English with, whatever, right? Because her mom understood, I don't know how to teach all the subjects, right? And it's like, what 250K mastermind are you in? I don't know. Like I said, it's just so funny to me too that people will scream at me classism because I went to school for a lot of things and then I bring forth the knowledge I learned in school, but then no one's clapping mastermind when it's like, you're incorrect about this statement that's pretty demonstrably provable because I make more money than you. But no one's like, oh, classism. It's the brain rot. It's so strange. A lot of it comes from American exceptionalism and the thought of the modern American dream and people just wanting to be Elon Musk. But like, we're neither here nor there, you know?
So
next one.
Homeschool. Things our homeschooled 6-year-old will not be learning in first grade. 1. How to raise his hand to speak. 2. To ask permission to use the bathroom.
So I think the bathroom thing's a bit stupid, and I've always thought it was stupid. I usually let the students go unless it was like I was busy. Like it was like as in like just like wait a minute and let me get through this important thing and then we'll get going, you know? Or if I knew like they were somebody was trying to vape in the bathroom. That's a joke. That's a joke. But I'm just saying, like, you can read them a little bit usually. But the thing is for example, the thing like the hand up thing, a lot they never can expand beyond just the very basic low level perception of something. The hand up to speak is a way of teaching boundaries, and it's a way of teaching compassion and a way of teaching the idea that we should respect each other's time to speak. And I understand, obviously, with things like with neurodivergent children, I know with myself, I had really, really high anxiety, and it was hard to do that. It was hard to manage that, and it took me a really long. I'm talking like, I was still cutting people off sometimes in grad school, like not intentionally, obviously. It's not just as simple as they're too lazy to do things properly, and they're trying to target a child. You know what I mean?
3. To hold a bubble in his mouth. 4.
I don't know what the bubble thing is. I've never heard that.
Comparing himself to his peers and either making fun of those who are different than him, or how to tone down his personality and dull his uniqueness so that he himself doesn't get bullied. Basically, how to conform. What our homeschooled 6-year-old is learning: philosophy, chess, science, gardening, math, entrepreneurship, reading, how to be bored, how to listen to his own instincts and figure out what he loves, rather than just trying to keep up with what's being forced on him by an outdated educational model. This is homeschool. Things are homeschool.
And I always think it's so funny that these homeschool people are always fighting with the model of the education system are the same ones that are like defunded. In order to update, you need money. Sorry. And also, when we're talking about things like conformity, the nature of work is to conform to a certain degree always. Even the pyramid scheme lady. You know what I mean? Like, she's got to be able to sell to people. She has to be able to read and follow social cues and follow all these different things. And things like compassion and not to bully each other are taught in public school. I actually have a lesson plan that I made on something like that I wanted to show for this exact reason.
Start unschooling him. He will be in 2nd grade. But I want to share some things with you guys that I'm going to be doing to make sure that I don't fuck up his education or fuck up his future. Some of you guys in my comments, not all of you, most people in my comments actually are homeschooling or unschooling. And I love that. We built this community of people, this community of like women that really just think the same. And I fucking love that. Like, that's been my goal this entire time with this.
The goal the entire time was an echo chamber. Period. Iconic. Because here's the other thing too, right? People disagree with me in my comments constantly. And it says I'm obviously like I'm whiny about it. Like when I talk about like the moms getting mad at me at the Rob the Christie video. For the most part, and you'll see like in my comments, like I will directly interact with people who disagree with me. And usually respectfully, I'll just be like, you know, like, oh, this is where I'm coming from, and this is why I have this, and this is where this thought came from. And I build and change my opinions and my perceptions on things because of this. And you've seen it for how my content has developed on the platform in the past couple of years.
This platform is, can we create a community of people that all think the same? And we've done that. So tell me in the comments, if you homeschool or unschool, what are your best practices, your best tips? Okay, so a couple of things that I'm going to be doing are prioritizing to make sure that I don't fuck up his education and he learns the skills he needs to be a successful adult, is lots of time outside. This is going to allow his creativity to flow, letting children be children and not setting them in front of a fucking desk or a piece of paper or a book for 8 hours a day is the best way to get their creativity flowing. And that,
I don't know about America, okay, but when I was in elementary school, I believe we were outside twice or 3 times a day minimum. So like, because I can't remember if there was 2 recesses or not, because it was 12 years ago, but I definitely had one in the morning. There'd be a recess at like 9:30 in the morning, and then there would be our lunch would be split, half an hour outside at recess, half an hour in the lunchroom eating. And then we would have, I can't remember if we would have one in the afternoon, but even then you often had gym class, which was outside for my elementary school because we didn't have a gym. But other schools, if they had gyms, they still brought them outside pretty often. So there was play at least. Like it's not, elementary school, I promise you, is not like a corporate job. It's not worked like a corporate job in the way that she's trying to indicate that it is.
matters in life, especially when you're trying to do something that you love. I'm going to take him grocery shopping. We're going to start a garden, doing lots of gardening, lots of hands-on stuff to teach him these things, not just reading out of a fucking book, which is what's wrong with public school. So I'm going to also teach him about money. That goes into grocery shopping, okay? I'm going to teach him how to be frugal, teach him how to shop for the things that he needs, not always what he wants. I'm going to teach him how to set boundaries with people. I'm going to teach him how to create friendships and connections with people. I'm going to teach him how to bake and cook. Do you know how many adults there are right now that 30, 40 years old don't know how to fucking cook?
High schools have home ec classes very often. People just choose not to take them. And also, it's a parent's responsibility to do that a lot of the time when that's not available. Like, this comment sums it up so well. You just made a list of things that parents do. Because that's really what it is. And also, how are you going to teach your child to foster relationships and friendships when there's no other kids around? That's like the biggest thing about public school. And the thing is, too, is like that's planned into the process. That they're in a group of a bunch of different kids. Like, that thought is brought into education. It's like she knows nothing about school. Clearly she doesn't even remember elementary school, is I think what's happening here. And is just imposing these very superficial, extremely surface level beliefs to just like shit on people. It's weird.
Which is crazy to me, okay? After a certain point, you can't blame your parents for that shit no more. You can learn, all right? We're also going to be doing lots of sports. So he'll be in any sport, every sport.
The kid's going to be blaming you that they don't know how to read, though. Let's be real.
Sport that we can possibly think of, because we will now have time to do so. I'll be taking them to the aquarium and zoos and learning through life experiences. And that is what unschooling is. Now, a lot of people think that unschooling, and people will say, unschooling is giving your child autonomy over what they want to learn. And yes, that is true. But if you sit there and say, what do you want to learn today? And your kid goes, I don't really want to learn today. It's not your job to say, okay, that's fine. No, we're learning something today, but what do you want to learn first? Okay, that's how I'm approaching it. I'm not going to give my child full autonomy over dictating his entire education or his entire...
The problem is that you're giving yourself as an adult with no expertise or knowledge on education beyond a surface level, and maybe those homeschooling books from that guy that was like really Milton, I think, that was not right in this thought processes, in my humble opinion, I guess. You're giving yourself that full autonomy, right? Because the teachers don't have full autonomy. Even the Ministry of Education and how they develop, they're constantly reviewed. And everybody's constantly evaluated down the line, but you go unchecked. And that's a problem. That's not good. People need to be criticized. People need to be evaluated. People need to be looked at when they have the responsibility in the lives of children in their hands. When I'm talking about like education specifically as well, when it's so foundational and important to their entire lives going forward.
Little baby life, because if he chose, he would choose to do nothing, okay? But I will have lots of stuff planned out for us to do, physically, hands-on stuff, and I believe this is going to be the best thing I've probably ever done for my kids, and I'm really excited. I'm going to record everything, so if you're not following me, you definitely should be, because I am documenting the fuck out of this experience, because I have been feeling in my heart for a very long time that public school is just not, it's just not it. It's just not. And I think that a lot of you watching this, you probably feel the same way. So I'll take the lead. I'll do this. I will lead you on this, even though I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I know that I'm gonna figure it out, and I trust my instincts and what I feel is best for my child over anything else that the government or society has to say about it. So make sure you tap that follow button and follow me if you relate to this.
I unfortunately, if you saw when I was clicking through my tabs, there was a duplicate TikTok, so I only have 4. Oops. But we ball, I feel like. Let's watch this one for good measure.
So the whole interview was about, like, you know, the dangers of unschooling, and the person, there was like a homeschooling expert that was like, well, my concern is that they're not going to be civic-minded members of a functioning democracy. First of all, it's dysfunctional, but second of all, that's the whole point. to not pump out more civic-minded members of a functioning democracy. Lol. This is so... How's it going, guys? So,
I hate to be that guy. I hate to be that guy. Okay. The vibe that I'm getting is that she doesn't know what that means. Also, if you see me looking around, there's TikTok on this screen, there's me over here, there's TikTok over here, and there's me over here. So I'm just overstimulated, mind you. But so now I read on what unschooling is to make sure I had an idea of what we're working with. Teacher of the Year Award. Schools were designed by Horace Mann, other instruments of the scientific management of mass population. In the interest of managing each generation of children, the public school curriculum has become hopelessly flawed attempt to define education and find a way of delivering that definition to a mass number of children. So a lot of it is based on like this specific thought process. The problem is that the assumption of that thought process too is that the curriculum is never adapted or developed. I don't know if in the United States that is the case, and that's what my whole video is. I don't know in the United States if that's the case, because I'm not just going to do a couple of little Googles and then assume the entire education system exists in a certain way, like in the sense of that all the United States works in this way or whatever, or, you know, they just literally sit at a table with a book in front of them for 8 hours, nothing else happens, like the assumptions that these unschooling parents are making. Obviously there's enough similarities I can go off of from the Quebec system, and I've worked with a bunch of other systems, and I have worked with students from the United States before, so that gives me like a more vast knowledge on these things. But I just don't understand why the assumption is always that it's like stable, like it's not static, it doesn't move, because there are adaptations that are made. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna watch the 5 TikToks that don't like unschooling, and then we're gonna get into the third part, which is like me as a teacher, yada yada, whatever.
I think by now most of us have seen this previous creator's like nature mom approach to unschooling homeschooling, and now she's selling courses on homeschooling. And as someone who was homeschooled, I want to talk about this epidemic, because y'all need to stop encouraging people who are not prepared to homeschool their kids to homeschool their kids. There is a reason you need a degree and certification to teach kids in like public schools and stuff.
Actually, hold on, I have it scanned. My brevet d'enseignement. Was that in English? Come on, Mika, think! Teacher certificate? Unfortunately, I can't show a lot of it because it has like my whole name. It's got a bunch of other silly stuff. So I'm just gonna do this so you can see like half of it. Right? You can see that it has that. You can't read the text. It's all written in French too, which doesn't help. So it says... La présente brevet d'enseignement confère à Mika, lots of other names, qui a satisfait aux exigences de règlement sur les autorisations d'enseigner, le droit d'enseigner dans l'établissement régi par les lois et règlements dont l'application relève du ministère de l'Éducation. Okay, and I'm also still congested. I was sick. That's why I haven't recorded in a while. So making fun of my French is illegal and not allowed, and I'll ban you. Mods, ban them! And then also, just for the sake of it, we got a little stamp on it. I got a seal on it too. Obviously, this is the scanned one, because I also don't want to take the paper one out and accidentally show you my license number, and like, which would be really bad. So anyway, I have one of those, is what I'm saying. Because like the degree is not the license. Like the license is separate, and like the little thing I just showed you is like half of what the license looks like. So, yeah. Anyway, I also, this is the thing I always say too. It's like, do you want like a doctor that's never gone to school? Do you want an unschooled doctor? Because it's like, and the assumption is just they won't do it, which is so wild. Like, they won't be lawyers, they won't be doctors, because I run a pyramid scheme.
Most people are usually shocked when I tell them I was homeschooled growing up, because homeschooling has gotten a bad rep from people like this. Or like the super religious people who will take their kids out of school to homeschool them, really just in an attempt to like not actually educate them, i.e. not teach them about evolution or not teach them about birth control and things like that. My family actually isn't religious at all, and we're not weird granola nature people. My siblings just grew up in the 90s, and they needed special accommodations that at the time school didn't provide. And then by the time I came along, they were just all already homeschooled, so it seemed like the natural order of things. And eventually in like middle school / high school, I was put back into school. Because by high school, even my mom acknowledged that there are like subjects that she's not apt enough to teach. Because newsflash, homeschooling is really hard if you do it legally. Yes, there is like a legal curriculum to homeschooling and guidelines and set things you're supposed to learn in subjects. And at the end of the year, if you're doing it legally, your kids are supposed to take the same like standardized tests to prove that they can move up to the next grade. And you're actually teaching them things. And if you don't follow these like state mandated guidelines, that's just child neglect. You're not homeschooling your child. You're neglecting them. And I'm not necessarily talking about this creator.
She's actually so much more base than me. Like, I'm like way more like, okay, but like touching the brakes. It's also because I'm a licensed teacher, right? So obviously, like for me, there's my professional reputation on the line with how I navigate this conversation. That's why I'm so, because I feel like a lot of people are probably watching this video and they'll be like, Mika, why aren't you like hitting the gas? Like, why is your foot not on their neck like it was on Nerd City's neck for 2.5 hours last week? But it's just because, like I said, this one ties into my professional reputation, so this is a little bit more complicated.
Specifically, of course, but there were so many families who did this. Because we went to like a co-op once a week where you would sometimes take classes with other kids, and that's where we would run into like, it was a very religious co-op because that was the main.
I promise you, I did not watch this in advance, right? So you see, I know what I'm talking about. I've pointed out all the different things that are going to come into homeschooling.
Demographic and the stories I could tell from that alone. And my mom did an amazing job. Actually, when we went back into school, we were above where we were supposed to be in a lot of subjects, but not everyone can do this.
Skip.
In my professional life, I'm a psychologist who specializes in relationships. But in my personal life, I'm also the person who overshares on the internet about my experience and special interest obsessions with cults and education. So when I was 8 years old and nearly 5 feet tall, the neighbor boy asked me if I wanted to go outside and ride bikes with him. And I got out my purple Huffy and I met him down on the street, only for him to look at me with my training wheels and give me a puzzled look. He was nice about it and I played it off. Oh, my dad didn't have time to take them off. But that feeling is horrible. And that times 10,000 is what I think radical unschooling unnecessarily does to kids' development. I homeschooled my kids for 1 to 3 years, depending on the kid. Even started a kind of educational co-op where a bunch of 5th graders came over to my house to learn together, because I think the peer pressure aspect and gamification aspect of pushing through academics is pretty useful. And I'm not religious and I wasn't scared of bullies.
Oops. I actually disagree with that. I do disagree with the pushing aspect and the peer aspect being necessarily completely useful. I think if it wasn't angled on the way of like you will be an unsuccessful loser, you would actually get a lot less people like the unschooling people that we're watching that are like in pyramid schemes and my kid's gonna be, want my opinions, whatever, because they felt like they were ostracized in their education experience, and that often is what leads to these types of experiences.
Or any of the reason you hear for parents deciding to homeschool. I just thought they could learn deeper and make closer friendships if you cut out the fluff and if you were specialized and intentional with a kid's education, So I'm not completely anti-homeschooling, even though I do think there should be more safeguards because people can hide behind it and be neglectful or abusive. But of course, I was projecting how I was as a kid. Why would you care to be a part of a larger sheepy community if you have 5 to 10 close friends? And don't you want to spend fun, indulgent time on the parallels and contrasts between Russia before World War I and Germany after World War I? Anyway, that was not the way my allistic kids thought. And they asked me to go back to public school basically when puberty set in, even though they did admit that they learned way more and way more quickly in homeschool. And my youngest, to this day, his best friend is a homeschooler. So it's all good now. So I'm not anti-homeschool. If you're actually providing socialization, good academics, and you're not doing it to fulfill something in you, it's really for your kids. But I think we should be saying to parents, like, don't lie to yourself and tell yourself you're giving.
That's what I was saying too, right? So much of the unschooling, especially as the internet phenomenon, is just based on fulfilling internalized desires that were never met, or selfish thoughts or feelings that they had they were not fulfilled with as a kid, which is not something they should be projecting onto your children, especially with something as important as their ability to do basic arithmetic, as their ability to do literacy, as their ability to do whatever.
them the socialization they want and need. If you're not, and don't lie to yourself either about preparing them for life in a useful way if you're not, because you've fallen victim to groupthink. Okay, so we were around homeschool families nonstop during those years. When I tell you my kids were insanely social, they were insanely social. But my point is, we got to know and love some unschooling families too. And I see the attractiveness of that ideology. I do. I've read John Holt. And you know what else I see? I see the love that a lot of these parents have for their kids. Like, they're not all doing it out of laziness because they'd rather their kid be on an iPad all day. They truly drink the Kool-Aid that their kids will learn naturally with just presenting them with opportunities to learn and bringing them to museums. Like, nothing should be pushed. No background knowledge, no reading, no math, and that's better for their kids. My suspicion is that a lot of them are on the spectrum, and maybe their kids are either anxious or also on the spectrum and have either naturally lower needs for affiliation or are socially anxious. So they think they're loving their kids by being so gentle and child-led. And man, I know learning disabilities and dyslexia and dyscalculia and that stuff is real and mostly genetic, not due to neglect. And lots of the unschooling community actually have struggling kids, and they think the best thing they can do is protect them from pressure and the feeling of failure. But here's where being a psychologist is useful. I disagree wholeheartedly. I think the best thing for these kids, and research bears it out, is a systematic, disciplined, multisensory approach to development, like developing like a muscle, these cognitive processes and habits.
That's so funny. Because I remember one of the things I learned in university was that like learning styles are not really a thing. Like the auditory learner, the visual learner, the whatever. And the best approach is actually a multi-variable stimulation based on a bunch. So like the best way to teach, for example, this is why when you often have newer teachers, for example, they utilize a lot of technology and stuff, where it's you should have the notes in front of you, then you should have the person at the front talking to you, and also the visual element of the presentation, and then some sort of tactile element, whether that be kind of like discussion within each other or a physical thing that they can hold, and working on it that way and having that cyclical reinforcement. So I think that's really funny that she says that, because that's the thing. That's the learning styles aren't real thing is very, very new as a concept, and is something that's still sort of in the works based on differentiated learning pathways. But yeah, I think, and I feel like me saying the learning styles aren't a real thing is gonna be like a really big, that's gonna be like the biggest point of argumentation in the entire comment section.
It can be gentle and it can be parent-led instead of being taken out with an IEP. But let's not hide between unschooling as the answer. Same with anxiety. Systematic, guided, and supported exposure, not isolation and protection from difficult emotions. And that happens a lot with these sensitive, risk-averse parents. I'm not going to call it like Munchausen's by proxy. It's just they don't want their kid to tolerate difficult emotions, and that would naturally happen in a group situation where they're not as isolated. Okay, and related, back to my bike story. That weekend, my dad took me out on my bike. Even though I was convinced I couldn't learn it, I couldn't do it. I was real stubborn. I shed a lot of tears. I fell a lot. And I'm still not the best bike rider to this day. But when my family wanted to ride bikes together on the Santa Monica Boardwalk this spring, I got to join in. And that's all I have to say about it.
That was kind of girl boss. But like I said too, it's like obviously there's things I disagree with. And I'm not, because the thing is too, a lot of times these unschooling people, because they have this sort of like radical approach to just like the way that we interact with each other as a species, genuinely, they don't, a big thing they say is there's no leniency, there's no variation, there's no critical thought on this beyond just like not liking that it's different. And it's like, no, clearly. And that's what I try to do with my videos too. I try to have these conversations. It's you can see me, and this is why it's unscripted too, and I thought that was appropriate, is that you can see me actively, critically breaking down where I agree, where I don't agree, what thoughts are good, what parts are good, what parts are bad, and where I think the tendencies and the values and the selfish inclination of some of these parents starts to come in.
You know how I am about public school. I remember when Riker came back from his first day of kindergarten 5 years ago, and he said, "Mommy, please don't make me go back to that place. Don't make me go back." And I looked at him and I said, "Riker, you have a voice. You don't have to." And it was the best decision I could have ever made for my child and his health.
So like homeschooling?
No. Not homeschooling. Unschooling. Instead of filling the child's brain with unnecessary knowledge, we instead nourish things that he shows interest in. Recently, it's been karate. For the last couple years, it's been karate. You know, he's not in karate classes, but
This is clearly satire. I think it was just fun to put this in, though. And there are very specific, like, things that she's pointing out on, like, the nurturing aspect as well, which is funny.
He does love to punch and kick me and other people. Of course, I was worried when we first started doing it that he wasn't going to show any interest in things like, you know, reading or writing or basic math, but it'll shock you. Children want to learn. You know, he's almost 11 now, and he came up to me the other day and he said, "Mommy, look what I can do." And he counted to 6. I don't know where he learned that. And he has recently shown an interest in spelling as well, which was shocking because mostly he just punches and kicks things. But he wrote out the word boobs 10 times on a sheet of paper, and then he drew a pair. I was shocked. I also don't know where he learned that from. Little Julia.
I lived for that. And this is the last TikTok.
Support unschooling. I've gotten hate from parents who unschool their kids for not supporting it. Here's the thing though, I was unschooled, and you probably weren't. So here's why I don't support it. As a kid, I spent my childhood learning to play chess, circuit boards, knit, fun stuff like that. But I didn't want to learn to read, and I didn't want to learn to do math because that was boring. So in the rules of the philosophy, my mom didn't make me. So by the time I hit middle school, all the other kids were making fun of me for not knowing how to read. My mom signed me up for a junior high literature class in my homeschool group, and I didn't know how to do anything. To prepare for the class, I had to teach myself how to read because my mom wouldn't. I did this by watching YouTube videos and figuring out that they were saying the name of the video in the video and then figuring out what the words were. For high school, I decided to go to public school because
And actually, that's so funny that she's saying what she figured out how to read by taking the words of the videos and matching them. That's a phonetics-based reading approach, which is really bad for phonetics, but when this is only phonetics, right? This is not whole language, it's not partial language, it's just phonetics based on what she's pairing. This is what like students with like dyslexia would do when they would be able to like pass the reading assessments, but then couldn't actually comprehend what they were reading because they would just pattern match like that. That's a form of pattern matching. That's not actual literacy, because literacy is the ability to contextualize and deconstruct that knowledge. And the way that you would test these types of things is, for example, this video title is probably my unscripted rant on unschooling. One of the ways that you could do it would be, can you write that title in different words? So, for example, could be me talking about unschooling with no script, or using no script to talk about unschooling. Right? So there's different variations. That would be a way to test if you can deconstruct properly. So that's what I'm saying too. It's like she's even saying now, yeah, see, I failed out of high school because I had no clue what I was learning. I was missing all of the building blocks everyone else had, and was told by teachers I just wasn't applying myself. It took 10 times longer to try to learn things that just clicked with other kids because those thresholds were not met on time. That's something that's so important too.
That was not getting the education I deserved. And guess what? I immediately started failing. I didn't have the years of prior education building me up to prepare me for the level of work I had. I was kicked out before I got to graduate. So I was unschooled.
I wonder if she ended up actually graduating. Yeah, I think it's different. It's interesting. Anyway, all right. Part 3 of the video, finally. When I was using the lesson plan I had when I was recording, like the face cam, I was using a lesson plan that was as a result of, I had built upon something that happened in my classroom. When I was editing it, I thought if I had a teacher where they did this type of thing, which I've had that happen when I was in school, where they like developed content necessary based on like what was going on in the environment and things like that. I was like, would I like if they talked about it on the internet? And I was like, maybe not. So what I'm going to do instead is I have a lesson plan from when I was working my first teaching internship, which it's like way more discouraged that you are off it. It depends obviously on what school you're into, on like making content on your own. It's more about learning how to teach. So I have a lesson plan that I had redacted that I made from when we were reading a novel, which was also just something that a lot of the unschooling moms were particularly nasty about. You know, it was like, oh, you're just going to sit down and read a book all day. But first, I'm going to show the different pieces of the curriculum so that the lesson plan like makes sense when you're looking at it. And then this is how we're going to end the video. So first off, this is the curriculum for secondary cycle 1. This just means middle school. Secondary school, so Quebec, technically secondary school is grades 7 to 11. Cycle 1 is your middle school 7-8, and then cycle 2 is 9-10-11. So this is the basis of the layout where you want to integrate all of your other existing programs to be able to work through and take things away from each one of the different ones. A goal is a well-rounded education. This is a huge thing in all of Quebec, at least at the roots, like idealistically, because that's also why when you go to college, which is sort of mandated, so you finish in grade 11, and then if you want to go to like a good university, usually before you're 21, you have to do at least 1 of 2 years of what's called CEGEP, which functions very similarly to like American Community College. And then, but when you're in CEGEP, you have to take, so let's say my first semester, I did applied science. I had badminton class with my brother, which was actually kind of fun. And then I had a class called pop culture. I had calculus. I had biology, and I had general chemistry. And then I had introduction to college English, which is comparable to like a grade 12 English class. Even though I found it to be, I've taught a lot of students in grade 12 English, I found intro to college English to be much more difficult. And then I think that was it. Yeah. 6 classes or something like that, right? Calculus, chemistry, biology, and then pop culture. Oh, I had philosophy, badminton. I don't know. If I'm missing one, it's really not my circus nor my monkeys at this point. But anyway. So I just want to show too that, so SELA just means secondary English language arts. This is because there's an emphasis on, like I said, there's that 2 languages kind of thing. So this is the one. SELA, like this, is when you are in English school and you are taking English in English school. So like the English literacy class, right? Like you're reading like full novels, you're doing like full papers. There's no second language element at all. So then you have social messages and meaning, integrated profile, familiarity, and like linking literacy to life. That's a huge part of the program. Integration of prior experience. That's why you do things like what are called reading responses, where it's just a really, really well fleshed out reflection on a novel, where you have to talk about codes and conventions or author's techniques or whatever term you're using. Rhetorical devices would also be another way to describe those things. You have to do a judgment on it. You have to connect it to another piece of text or another thing that's happened in the world. Or if you can't think of that, something that's happened to yourself. But it's more discouraged to do the one connected to yourself just because it's hard to, like, the teacher won't know the experience. Like, if you connect to another book and the teacher knows what the book is, it's easier to, like, see the validity and the connection. And then you also have to do, and then describe the meaning of the text. Like, what's the main takeaway? So they have the different competencies. There's 4 competencies. It's a bit confusing. I don't know why they do 4. Everyone marks it as 3 anyway. I don't want to get into that. That's, like, too nitty-gritty. So then, here are your integrated pieces. These are your 4 competencies. Now, what people tend to use, they'll kind of put them together, is they tend to do making sense of a text, if I remember correctly, combined with competency 4. So they just make these all like one writing competency because that's what it's like in cycle 2. But what I wanted to show, too, is just how we have all these different features of each of the competencies and how to lay it out. But there's no lessons in here. There's nothing about what you're going to be teaching them. There's no books listed in here. There's no worksheets in here. There's nothing that's just slapped in front of you that you're supposed to just do. Obviously, again, this is linked down below if you want to actually read it. Like, I'm not going to read through a 40-page curriculum. That's so boring. But let's do, even if you do, these are like the more point-by-point things that people tend to refer to. These are called the progressions of learning. Even these, I want to get to the chart. That's highlight. Yes, I've been using this clearly. But you can see that all of these things are still just points on examples on what you want them to be able to do. So these little arrows just mean that they should be working on this, and this is the point where they should be fully proficient in it. So such as citing evidence, they should be able to be really good at it by the 9th grade, I believe, or 8th grade, before they go into high school. But then, like, some of them that are more complicated, so interrelationships between structures and features and genres, how text is produced, impact of self as a reader, you want that by the 11th grade. And then they might have an example of a text. But it's still pretty, like, you're not made to use these by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, and then you have these things called cross-curricular competencies, which is where you evaluate based on like kind of more abstract side pieces. So if you go to, let's say we go back to this and you scroll up here, these are your competencies here. And it's the way that you're able to connect something that people often don't think can connect to languages. So like this is how like math knowledge will integrate into language knowledge, will integrate into language arts. So you have use information. This one is useful in all classes and was used pretty often. Problem solving, this can work in English as well as something like math and science. Exercise of critical judgment, I had this one a lot because I particularly liked criticism and media literacy stuff. Creativity, adopts effective work methods. And when you're doing your evaluations as a teacher, often in your first year teaching too, even when you're hired and everything and the principal's doing an evaluation on you, this happens for your first couple of years, you have to provide a lesson plan that includes these. These are the schools I worked at anyway. Communication technology, that just means like, can they use a computer pretty much? His or her potential, that means like, are they working as hard and like to the level that they can? Like, are they really smart but then they're not actually doing the work? Are they struggling a lot and playing it off or cheating maybe? Like, this is to understand those different and like how they're able to integrate those pieces. And like if they're having difficulty with this, there's just a specific competency for it. Cooperates with others. Again, teaching empathy is what I was talking about before. This goes all the way through till grade 11 in Quebec. This is not just something that you do in elementary school. Like literally one of the things in here is like managing conflict. And then just appropriate communication, right? And then you have these things called broad areas of learning. This is how it relates to the rest of the world. So you have health and well-being. You have personal career planning. Again, something that the unschooling moms were saying was not a thing. Environmental awareness, consumer rights and responsibilities. So this is how you operate within the world and ecologically as well. This one usually fell to something called ethics of religious culture, which is the lesson plan I was using before because I taught that as well. Which just means like ethically, how are you running in the world? And then versus like religious culture, how are you integrated with like really different religious beliefs? How do your own beliefs, whether that be just like spirituality, if you don't have beliefs like that, if you're religious, whatever, how is that all going to work together? Media literacy, I was spamming this one on my plan, so if I'm going to be real. And then I found too, when I was working through this through teachers college or whatever, and my master's degree or what have you, I found I got much better at integrating this into the channel. This is the bones of what my whole channel is built on, because I was able to learn these things as working as a teacher. Citizenship and community life, this is literally how you exist with different people of like different races, different cultures, as well as like yourself and your social and how you work in democracy. This is the thing that one of the unschooling ladies was like, I'm not trying to build more cogs in the system. And the cogs in the system are like understanding concepts of power and how you have dependence as an individual and like equality and empathy. And just, like, not being a libertarian, like, selfish-natured, hyper, self-focused individual. They might suggest, like, what classes would best exercise this. So, you also want to talk about diversity and things like that, but some subject areas, social sciences, languages, and personal development are especially useful for helping students discover. So, those are the other things, because in my lesson plan, I have these in them. So, you can see I did this, like, last spring, so it's been about a year and a half since I was working here and doing this. So we read the novel Freak the Mighty, which is a little bit outdated, I found, but it wasn't bad. It was very cute. Like, it was a pretty like chill. Just some of the language in it, there was like, you know, ableist slurs and things like that I would actually tell the students like I would not read them. And I would just kind of tell them why and how I felt about it and all that kind of, you know, just the materials that they need. This is the subject area competency. So this is when there's 4 competencies. This is I actually did wrong because you're supposed to write what number of competency is. Reading, I think, is competency 2. Is again with cycle 2 or cycle 1's a little bit more confusing because there's 4 of them, but I think that's competency 2. So you work on what's called backwards design, which means what's the goal, and then everything else will be built around it. You're supposed to write this in. So I had that they're going to read as a group, and they will complete the 3 sets of chapter comprehension questions between reading the chapters. Essential questions were, how were the events transpired to the conclusion, and how do the students feel about the novel, their opinions, and a valuable understanding. So I just had like that. I had agenda for the class. These periods were quite long. They were 70 minutes or 75 minutes. The second school I worked at was 50 minutes, so it was a very different environment. So I said students will know the events that transpired the last 3 chapters of the book. This is interesting because this was one of my first ones I did, so this was actually worse than what I normally was able to kind of put out. I would also have had students will know the effects of the novel's events on the characters as the ending transpires. That would have been something that would have been useful as well, which I do have here. You want to understand going into it that had happened rather than like that I will be able to guide them into it. So the development of the climax of the novel and the overall plot, and how the conclusion shaped the storyline through Max's perception. So then we started with the discussion of the book. I started that with every class. I would be like, what do we remember? How are we feeling? What's going on? Where are we going from here? And then we read the chapter 23, and we did a mix of chosen and volunteering because I was able to integrate their marks for oral evaluation into it as well, which was easier than them going in front of the class and doing stuff. Because again, I taught 7th grade, so. And then they do their chapter questions individually. So this cycled between quiet time and talking time or whatever. And then what I would usually do in the middle of the period is I would give them, like I said, I used to call it 5 minutes of yap time, where they could just yap at each other without me controlling them. And then we would cycle back in. And it usually worked okay because they knew it was coming. They knew when it ended in advance. This is also why doing things like an agenda was really useful as well. Expressing their judgment. This is the cross-curricular competency. So articulate, communicates viewpoints. They're going to do their students' narratives will be based on their viewpoint and structure based on specific requirements in the instructions. This is vague because I had to provide a sheet, but I don't have the sheet. I don't know where it is. And then citizenship and community life was my focus, and they're going to understand their role in society, and people live very different and difficult lives based on circumstances they cannot control. One of the main characters of the book is disabled, and the other has many familial issues. Also, I did have a lot of conversations with them about socioeconomic class. This was because I taught really rich students, and I would talk to them about, like, what subsidized living was like, for example, and things like that. So just do the questions, read the chapter, cyclical. This is just like your timing. They want to know what your timing layout is like. And then universal design for learning. So this is if students are struggling, how do we make it so that the work is equally as challenging across from the highest to the lowest level with just slight adjustments. So I had arrangements for more time and guidance, and I would structure the questions a bit differently for them if they needed. And then the students that needed more challenge, what I would do is I would have them just further explain. We would talk through it a little bit just to kind of get the cogs going, if you will. EDI, this is the United States called DEI sometimes. It's equity, diversity, inclusion. The novel discusses characters with trauma, mental health problems, disabilities, socioeconomic differences. And I said they come up organically in class discussion. I was talking about how I was discussing this. I had them just like finish over the weekend or whatever it was, or if they had time at the end of the class, any questions they might have skipped, because if they couldn't finish them in the 2 minutes, I always let them know that they had a lot of time. Formative assessments means they're not marked. So the chapter comprehension questions were not for grades. Once in a while they would be, like one random chapter here and there, but nothing crazy. And then assessment as learning is like, how are we able to learn more organically and as a group? And then summative means for marks. I didn't have one for this because the marks came from a couple of the chapter questions they did, and then they had a project. I can't remember what they did after that. Anyway, EDI written again because there's 2 slots for it for some reason. And then these are what's called the professional competencies. So there's 13 of these. These are what you have to do as a teacher, and you had to prove which ones you were utilizing. Technically, you're supposed to always use all 13, but these are just like ones you're using the most. So acting as a cultural facilitator, so this is doing things like discussing living situations and stuff like that. Masters the language of instruction. I taught English, and they were speaking English, so that was always had to be there. Plan teaching and learning situations. Did I do a lesson plan? Pretty much. Evaluate learning. Is there an evaluation process? Yes, through those different assessments. And then managing how the classroom operates. This is doing things like making sure this timing is withheld, and also like can I bring them back in during gap time, etc. So yeah, that's what a lesson plan looks like. And I just want to know, like, look how much more comes in. Even this is just reading a book. most of my lesson plans, I tended to avoid things that were this linear if I had the choice. This is still very linear, and you still see how much more has to go in. We talk about socioeconomic differences and the ways that the characters live through the novel. Talked about how they're going to understand how the conclusion of a novel works and how the plot builds up. They want them to be able to articulate their own viewpoints on the novel. You want them to understand how like the society around them works because of the different experiences that the novel has. We even have EDI considerations as well, and I have to understand that, like, how am I going to work with students with more difficulties or less difficulties, and then like how am I acting as a professional. So yeah, okay, so let's get to the rest of the video. Now, to end off, I just want to show the homeschool requirements for Quebec. So you have an annual notice of intent. So this has to be to your school service center. So you have to be affiliated with the school board no matter what. Every year you have to do it, and you have to share which one you're affiliated with and where you're working. School service center just means they eliminated school boards for the French sector. People are not liking that. I don't think it was a good decision, actually, generally. It just means that within a specific region, they all just have this one building that they work within, but now there's no differentiation on like types of school boards and stuff. English sector still has school boards, so those are still fully set as they would be in the United States. So your child has been home since the beginning of the year, and what you do if you send it later. You only have 10 days from the last day that your child was in school when you want to pull them out for homeschooling. Otherwise, it's going to be considered they're not attending school, which can have legal ramifications. You have to have a learning project where you have to have it done before September 30th. September 30th is the withdrawal or enrollment deadline for schools to be registered as a full-time student for the year. This just means, honestly, you know, like in some school, like you have to be 6 to be in the first grade. In Quebec, you need to be 6 before September 30th to be enrolled for that year at that age group. It's just because we only go to high school until grade 11. So they don't want you, let's say when you're going to college and university, to be like 16 in college for an entire semester. That's kind of the only, or not only, but that's like the main reasoning around that type of stuff. Again, you only have 30 days from the last day your kid was in school to state what their entire learning pathway is going to be and what the main project is going to be for the year. Monitoring meeting, participation during the year, I think it depends on the school board, the frequency. You need to have a status report within the 5 months of your child being in homeschool. And obviously this is different. There's different dates based on when they were pulled out. And it's only optional if your child was pulled out after March 31st, which means there's only 2 months left of the year of like actual content. Midterm report, 3 and 5 months between the implementation. Midterm can be optional if you're after December 31st because they've done more than half of the year in public school or private school. They have to be done everything by June 15th. And it has to be submitted no later than June 15th. And you can carry out other evaluation methods, let's say your own curriculum that you've made that's not based solely on the government guidelines, by June 30th and no later than 2 weeks after they've completed it if it is after June 15th. Learning project. This means all they're saying is that you need to demonstrate that they're able to do each one of these different types of subjects. And that there has to be a rational educational approach. And this is because teachers have to provide that. So essentially what's happening is, because we have to have our letters of intent and what our approach is going to be. My approach is very media literacy, empathy, and communication driven. That's what mine is. That's the foundation of what my philosophy was. I have one of my letters of intent on my Google Drive because I wrote one pretty recently. My focus was on creating an inclusive education space that valued diversity, differentiation, and crafting engaging materials for students of many backgrounds and skill levels. In doing so, one of my main goals was to implement technology for the students in a modern context, including media and graphic design, efficient ways to use research resources, and tools for using the Google Suite. When in my teaching internships, I taught English, drama, ethics to secondary 1 and 2 sports students. When teaching those students, I taught accelerate curriculum, manage frequent long-term absences, and foster relationships with parents and guardians to make sure the students stayed on track. And then I talked about the different things I had taught in school. And I said my focus was creating resources for more experienced educators to remain in touch with current socio-political climate that their student bodies exist within. That was my thesis, essentially. Mine was focused on working with adults, not with students, like with the way that you would teach old teachers how to like keep up with the times, essentially. Right? So this document is 40 pages. And you have to follow each one of these down to the subsection. They will clock you on the subsection if you're not doing it properly. You must indicate the evaluation methods you have chosen amongst the homeschooling regulation to evaluate the compulsory subjects. You have to have a teacher's, it has to be managed with a school board. It has to be done by a private school, which private schools also have to follow the curriculum that's as of 2019. Someone who holds a teaching license. So, for example, if my friend was homeschooling, I could facilitate the evaluations, which just means if they would have to show me the, let's say, because I could only facilitate, I guess, for English, ethics, and options courses like drama and stuff like that, because that's what I'm qualified with. I don't know if that extends more than that, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it's not. If a homeschool parent is like, Mika, is this English exam good enough? And I look at it and I can go, no. And then I submit to the board or I submit to the ministry that it's not, then it's void. Someone has to be able to review it who's registered. A portfolio that's given to the minister. Sometimes the way that they say minister, it's because it translates badly because the document is written in French. It just means given to the school, not school board, the education head. So, superintendent kind of, or like the head of the education department. Not department. I can't remember the word in English because it's ministère d'éducation. It's ministry. Is that the word in English too? Like, is it the same thing? Whatever. Let's say like the head of schooling in Florida needs to look at it. Or one of the people within that department is what I'm getting at. And I'm genuinely just struggling because of the language barrier issue. Because I read these in French so often. And it's so back and forth. Like, even at the bottom of the page, you can see Ministère d'éducation. It's written in French still. So you have to have it has to be a private school has to approve it, which private schools have people with teaching licenses in them. Someone who just has a teaching license, submitted to the minister. That guy has a teacher, that guy, girl, they, them, bestie, gang, whatever, has a teacher's license, or it's just use one of the exams that they've already have. But as you see that none of these are, the parent just gets to do it. There's a reason. So they just recommend a plan, let's say like grade 6, that you do the ministry examination for English language arts, do the one for math, and then somebody can make an evaluation, a French teacher that you know. And then you can make a portfolio for the other classes that don't have exams, and then you just submit that. But you see that a lot of these are, and you still have to hit every single course. You still have to do one for science, geography, one for history, and citizenship education. So the citizenship education for elementary is ERC, is the ethics class I just talked about. They call it citizenship education for elementary now, because it's an example for 6th grade. Okay. Point is, also, if you chose me to do your homeschooling stuff, I actually have to submit my license again to the ministry to make sure it's valid. Which it is. I showed you. It's got a little stamp and everything. Okay. But anyway, I'm just saying, notice how in-depth this is. Compulsory exams, secondary 2. Français langue d'enseignement just means language of instruction. That usually just means that it's like the language of instruction. It means it's just that you're doing French as the main language piece. But français langue d'enseignement means your French first language usually. So I don't know exactly what this grid is for. Typically you're doing this one. Français langue second programme de base, which just means the easy one. That's the one I did. And then programme enrichi. I didn't do enrichi. What I did is I finished the base program faster instead of doing the enriched one. That's just personal stuff, though. That doesn't really matter. Anyway, with this, I'm going to complete my almost 2-hour rant. What have I done to myself? Anyway, links to our Wastewood channel all down below, including members and patrons and stuff. I hope y'all have an amazing day, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye!
There was one moment where there was an argument backstage, and one member in particular threw me up a wall. So I said to him, if you don't remove those hands, there's a high likelihood you'll never use them again.